Hello everyone, welcome back to a new tutorial. This tutorial is about the reflex actions. So, we are going to look at some examples of reflex actions. In the previous tutorial, we have learned about the reflex, and we said that the reflex is an involuntary and nearly instantaneous movement in response to a stimulus. So, it is an automatic response which doesn't require a conscious thought of it, because the impulse actually doesn't reach the brain. The action is produced before the impulse reaches the brain. It only reaches the spinal cord. Now, before we start discussing the examples, it is important to know that most reflexes follow the same steps between the stimulus and the response. What happens is that in step number 1, the receptor detects the stimulus and accordingly creates an action potential in the sensory neuron. After that, the sensory neuron carries the impulse to the spinal cord. Inside the spinal cord, there is the relay neuron. The relay neuron connects the sensory neuron to the motor neuron within the spinal cord. After that, the motor neuron carries the impulse to the effector organ, mainly the muscle, to carry out the appropriate response. So these steps are common in almost all types of reflexes. An important example of reflex is the knee-jerk reflex. The knee-jerk reflex is a reflex commonly tested by doctors. It is a spinal reflex, which means that the impulse goes up to the spinal cord but not to the brain. When the leg is tapped just below the kneecap or the patella, it stretches the patellar tendon and acts as a stimulus. The stimulus initiates a reflex arc that causes the extensor muscle on the top of the thigh to contract. At the same time, a relay neuron inhibits the motor neuron of the flexor muscle, causing it to relax. This contraction, coordinated with the relaxation of the antagonistic flexor hamstring muscle, causes the leg to kick. After the tap of a hammer, the leg is normally extended once and comes to rest. The absence of this reflex may indicate nervous problems, and multiple oscillation of the leg may be a sign of a cerebellar disease. So, by the knee-jerk reflex, doctors can investigate or detect an underlying nervous disease. Another example of reflex action is the blinking reflex. When the cornea of the eye is irritated by a foreign body, the stimulus triggers an impulse along a sensory neuron. The impulse then passes through a relay neuron in the lower brainstem. Impulses are then sent along branches of the motor neuron, which is the 7th cranial nerve, to initiate a motor response to close the eyelids. The reflex initiates a consensual response. This means that both eyes are closed in response to the stimulus. This blinking reflex is very rapid. It occurs in around 1/10 of a second. Doctors test for the blinking reflex when examining unconscious patients. If this reflex is present, it indicates that the lower brainstem is functioning.